is a made-up scenario just for the purpose of this project. So he's not more offensive than any other people. This is the whole purpose of what we're trying to say here. The argument we're trying to make. We're trying to save the career of a beloved professor. And we're going to do that using Bayesian statistics. Next. All right, so that was a good picture. But okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to start with an uninformed prior, which would assume an equal likelihood for all possible proportions of offensive jokes in this context. We're then going to collect some evidence from this individual and from the population and code them as these jokes as either offensive or non-offensive. This uninformed prior with the evidence we collected from the individual, which gives us a posterior, and then we're going to compare this posterior to the population and show whether the offensiveness of this individual's jokes differs from the population, which would be the null, or does not differ, which would be the null, or does differ in some way, which would be the alternative analysis. So just to go into a little more background here, Patrick is known to make some politically incorrect jokes from time to time, and we had heard that the administration wanted to fire him for it. So as his students, we wanted to have his back. We wanted to say, no, Patrick, his jokes aren't any more offensive than any other people, and we wanted to show this using statistics. So we're going to show that the probability of a Patrick joke being offensive is not any more different than the probability of any average joke told from the population being offensive. We're going to collect a sample of 100 jokes from Patrick and code them as either offensive or non-offensive, and then 100 samples of just random jokes from the population and code them in the same way. Then for a few analyses, we're going to run the evidence we collect from Patrick through an MC analysis just to update our prior, which will give us a posterior distribution. And then we're also going to run it through a quick Bayes factor analysis as well, just to give us further support. So just to go into a little more detail about those methods. So we generated all the data within R. We created two distributions, and because we were defending the null here, we made both distributions have the same mean and the same standard deviation. Then we just had one of these distributions be Patrick jokes and one of them be jokes from the population. We used the best MC function within R, and we put in our evidence that we coded as Patrick's jokes, and that assumes an uninformed prior, which is what we wanted. And this function updates that uninformed prior with the evidence we give it, and gives us a posterior distribution as well as a 95% high density interval. So I'll show how we interpret that in a second, but the other function we used was this quick t-test Bayes function, which we gave the evidence of Patrick's jokes as well. I'll go interpretation. So with that high density interval, from the posterior distribution is between 0.39 and 0.6 out of 3, we can say that, so we can pick the mean from the population, which is 0.5, and say that, okay, the average joke from the population falls right in line with this highest density of probability of Patrick's jokes. So there really is no difference there. Any random joke from the population is going to fall right in line with this same average of offensiveness. And then just as further support with that quick Bayes factor t-test, it was really close to 0 there, 0.014. Which is strong support for the null hypothesis as well, that there really is no difference between these two distributions. So here's just a few graphs we provided as well. These are just histogram plots of the two distributions we created. These are the normal jokes from the population, and then these are the jokes made by Patrick. And you can see they're very similar. We did that on purpose. We wanted to have them be as similar as possible. Okay. So just to conclude with we have enough evidence to support the null hypothesis that the distributions aren't different, and we can tell the administration, no, you're wrong. Patrick isn't any more offensive than any other person. You don't really have grounds to fire him. Let him stick around for a bit. All right. So take any questions, and then this is our R script as well.
Questions? Come on, be nice to Shane. I'm gonna start asking questions. Okay, Shane's group. What distribution did you use?
As far as for the prior, for the posterior.
Any and all?
So we started with the beta 1,1 function, which was the flat, and then we did a random sample between of zeros and ones. We did 50 of each, and then ran that through the MCMC to get the what was it, like 100,000 things, and then plotted those as the distribution,
Okay.
and then
So-
updated the prior.
So your random number generator was?
R.
No. That's the software. But what random number function did you use?
Oh, to actually get the ones and zeros, we used no, it was actually just concatenate repeat 0 50 times, R 50 times, and then we ran it through the MCMC.
Oh, okay. So what you did was, so you seeded it rather than randomly sampled it. You seeded it as the prior probability was exactly 0.5.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay, so that was one question I had. The second was, how do you get base factor of 0? When base factor is a ratio of posterior probabilities for the hypothesis, for Seamus, not just for you, it's for your whole team. Amanda, you don't have to answer this question. How do you get base factor of 0 when it's a ratio of posterior probabilities? Because if there's equal evidence, right? There's equal evidence for posterior probabilities for both the null as well as the alternative. Being close to 0 would mean that the numerator would be much smaller, right? Or the denominator is infinitely large, but we're not gonna go there. It's constrained to 0. How do you get?
Two of our group members aren't here.
Those bastards. Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so when we were looking at like those charts of how to interpret base factor, I don't know if this is answering your question,
Go ahead.
but the larger the number over 0 offered more support for the alternative hypothesis, whereas smaller ratios below, well, not below 0, but the smaller the ratio, so it was like 1/30 would be, I think, the closest to what ours and the typical chart that you see, our number, would be strong support for the null hypothesis. I don't know if that.
No, that's the table that generally people will look at for interpreting base factor. But if you look at the typical table, the point of subjective equality is 1, not 0.
Sorry, I just had a question about your base factor. It wasn't exactly 0. It was like 0.0.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. So that would mean that it's actually favoring the alternative hypothesis and not your primary hypothesis, right?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
May I add in?
As opposed to them being
Um,
equivalent. Yeah.
The function we use, the t-test BF, it flips the numbers. So it's where the null is normally the alternative was.
Oh.
So a small one was actually for the null in this case, just
Okay.
because of the way it did the output.
Okay.
And we tested that by changing the mean from 0.5 to 0.9 and 0.1, and that yielded a really large base factor. So it just flips the thing. It's the specific test that does a weird output.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it is
So it's-
somehow,
So it's flipped.
yeah, it's flipped.
Okay.
So
All right. That's interesting. I don't know this function.
yeah,
So
I can show it to you later. if you want.
that's all right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's an inverse, right? My other hypothesis. What were you gonna say?
I was going to suggest that usually when you test these, you're not testing for the null, so it's probably just arranged so that it tests for the alternative thing to use.
Yeah. The alternative, which most base factor are reported in. Longs.
Got it.
Because logs are awesome. Yeah, learn that in school, you learn, fuck, I hate logs. Why do I have to learn this? It's because it takes really complicated math and turns it into simple addition and subtraction. So logs, my guess is that whatever the function is, take a look at it. But just, these are teaching opportunities and learning opportunities for you guys, okay? So it's not, I don't care. Shane, your answer was a good one. I don't know. When you don't know something, say, shit, I don't know. No idea.
Would the log be just 1 over whatever the Bayes factor equation is?
No, it's not gonna be an inverse then. It would be the log of 1. Right? Because what it's doing is it's recentering everything. And the beauty about logs is it takes really, really, really big numbers and squishes them down into tiny numbers. Right? If you got a calculator, just put in a few big numbers and put in a few small numbers like log of 1.
So we get a range between what, -1 and 1?
What's that?
We get a range between -1 and 1 rather
Yeah, well,
Fractions, numbers.
thereabouts. Yeah. And so that would be like if you see BF10, that's log base. That's a log transform of base factor or a base 10 log. Okay. And you'll see BF with a little LN, I think. Okay. All right. So that was group 3. Everybody has a form? Have your form open. If you don't have the form open or you don't have a phone or you're still on a flip phone from the 80s, just go to your next door neighbor and let them type in their whatever their votes are, and then ask to borrow their computer and type them in. Okay, ready? Okay, if you get the ready to. Hey. All right, who did we say? Group 5. What's that? Yeah.
It's ready.
And then I have another form later on for everybody.
So, did we do too much?
So,
We can get rid of 3 out of the 4 things that we did.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And this is all you have to do. This is the first project. Right? And this is a group of 5.
yeah.
We did a very good group.
You did it different.
Yeah. Together.
Yeah, this is good.
That was great.
Right. Cool, video? Yeah. It's struggling.
This is univariate,
Yeah, if you, I don't know what's going on. That really dark.
That'd be crazy. How do you
Sweet. So. Awesome. So
we were looking at rice crackers and whether they truly satiate hunger or not. So are they a savory snack or a disappointing dish? Are rice crackers what they're cracked up to be? We thought that was hilarious, by the way. We thought that was absolutely hilarious. Okay, so background. Rice crackers consumed worldwide, very tasty snack, but we were interested in whether people feel more or less hungry after consuming a rice cracker. So essentially, do rice crackers actually decrease your hunger? So what we did was we generated a forced binary data representing individuals' ratings of hunger after eating a rice cracker. So essentially, we had a 1 to 10 scale, but we forced them to choose either less hungry or more hungry afterwards. So our null hypothesis would be that a similar proportion of individuals should report feeling less hungry and more hungry. So essentially, null hypothesis, no effect on hunger. Probability of less hungry and more hungry should be about 0.5, right? So our priors, we entertained 9 hypotheses for the population proportion of people becoming less hungry from eating a rice cracker, so 0.1 to 0.9. And so we created prior probabilities for these 9 hypotheses using normal distribution with a mean of 0.5 and a standard deviation of 0.15. And we placed the greatest confidence in the null over 0.5 with, again, decreasing confidence as it goes away. So those would be our prior probabilities.
And the hypotheses, like if you remember the variable, the chip example had like, so like the 0.1, it'd be like, it'd be like, you had like 9 people say more hungry, 1 people said less hungry, and then as it progresses to 0.9, it flips. That's the example.
So then we generated data, so we gave 100 participants a rice cracker and surveyed them about their post-cracker hunger, and we observed 54 instances of less hungry and 46 instances of more hunger. So we specified the priors about the hunger satiating power of rice crackers, but now we have data, so we need to calculate the likelihood for each hypothesis, or the probability of observing the data, assuming the hypothesis to be true. So essentially, assuming rice crackers have no effect on hunger, what's the likelihood that I have observed 54 people saying that they were less hungry after eating one? And so this is just an example of our likelihood. So the likelihood of any 2 events happening together is just multiplying them together. So probability A and B. So in a world where less hunger, so this is from the 0.6 prior, the likelihood of giving 2 people rice crackers and giving each one response would be this calculation, and you could follow the tree diagram, and then multiplied by the number of ways that the combination could happen, right? So again, if you extrapolate that out times to the 54th power, and all that sort of thing, that's just the logic behind our likelihoods. What we find is this, right? So we can calculate our likelihoods, but then we want to combine our priors with the data we've collected. And because our prior probabilities indicate our relative confidence in the set of hypotheses, we can use them as weights to our likelihood. But since these prior weighted likelihoods no longer sum to 1, we have to normalize them, right? And so for each hypothesis, we divide the prior likelihood by the sum of all prior likelihood products, and we get our posteriors. So this is what the probability distribution of the updated beliefs about rice crackers. And so the evidence for the null hypothesis is strongest. So 0.65, that's a 0.5 hypothesis. And so calculating our base factor, we get a 0.4, which is anecdotal evidence for the null hypothesis.
You guys don't have any questions?
Do you feel your personal biases against rice crackers? I
felt like our biases were taken out of, we had the data, and our priors were just around the normal distribution around 0.5, so I think we were relatively unbiased in
You think the rice crackers could be variable that you didn't think about?
that. Could have.
Okay.
Quaker has quite a good rice cracker, actually.
All right, so we have two questions about subjective probability. Really, the subjective probability, the expectation that there's a bias that's associated with the outcome. And then the second is that you could have an expectation of different brands influencing this, and that could be pulled into the priors. Okay, remember this, priors can come from a swag, scientific wild ass guess, your hunch, anything. The beauty about priors is that you're essentially, you're putting in distribution form your expected outcome. And whether it's informed or not is irrelevant. But those questions are good ones because they tend to be the ones that people outside of Bayesian statistics will ask. Have you biased your results? Have you omitted things that are relevant, like actually comparing the right samples? But within Bayesian statistics, we may ask things like, given that you're talking about probabilities, like one being better than another, okay? Why would you choose a normal distribution over a distribution that models probabilities more efficiently and easier from a Bayesian perspective? Normal distributions suck for Bayesians. That's why we have MCMC. Right, so Nick, you don't get to answer this question. One of your teammates does.
We just figured, so like, so our kind of our main hypothesis was at 0.5, but we figured that we needed like a bit of leeway room in order to, because specifically for these reasons, that's what we kind of have a normal distribution. So you could basically think of it as like a majority of the people would, fit around 0.5 or even a little bit less at like, people would be slightly less hungry, slightly more hungry. But then like, so we took basically half of our sample and basically extrapolated 50% on the whole entire set of the normal curve, 50% to try to accommodate for
Yeah. Right, and that's what you did. Why though?
But could you also argue that, what you said about using normal distributions can be crappy, if you were to use an uniform distribution or uninformed? Could you also say like that's crappy too, because it's all subjective, so we just kind of did it.
Right. Right, so there's a rationale for using these different distributions. It's not that normal distributions are not necessarily inherently bad. They're just computationally nasty. That's why we would opt for a beta distribution for computational simplicity, okay? What you did isn't wrong necessarily. In fact, it's spot on. But there's a rationale for why you would select that. Why? Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
So I guess my thought is that it didn't seem computationally complex.
No, because you ran it.
Yeah.
Because you followed Barry's example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why would a beta distribution be?
Oh, because the beta update function is simply addition.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's hard to beat that.
I guess
It's really hard to beat that.
the rationale was so that we could see how it works, I guess.
Good. Okay, and that's a perfect rationale for it. It doesn't have to be that we demand that we do these things with normal distribution. It's, can you get an update from your data that suggests that with a normal distribution that the null is defensible? And the answer to that question is yes, clearly. Right, that is a defensible argument. So it doesn't really matter whether you use the beta distribution or the normal distribution. It's you have to be curious enough to see how it works. Okay. So there's no rules, and this is the unsettling thing about Bayesian statistics. There really are no rules, and it pisses people off. That's why we're not likely to see Bayesian statistics supplant frequentist models, because in frequentist models there are only rules. Most rules people don't understand. They're only rules. All right, good job, guys. All right, vote your conscience or their conscience.
not sure where this gets plugged in.
I know, that's awesome. We have to
Ah,
next
maybe. Ah, okay.
Good.
Push
Ah,
until it
There
works.
we go.
Okay, I'm Morgan. So
Hold
for,
on, sorry, just, we're buried in, at least I am. I can barely see my phone, so give me a minute. That's all that
are you ready? Okay.
Everyone good? All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So a group of graduate students intend to go backpacking through Europe, but they may be really good at psychology. They're not good at navigation, and they accidentally find themselves in the middle of Siberia. Back out of Siberia, because why would you do that? So they find their way to a very dinky, small Siberian airport, and they would like to fly out of Siberia, as anyone in Siberia would. But they're not sure if this airport is safe, or at least as safe as the population of airports generally. So they decide to use some Bayesian statistics to decide how skeptical they should be about using this airport to get the heck out of Siberia. So our null hypothesis is that the planes are just as likely to successfully take off from this Siberian airport as they are from any airport generally. The null hypothesis is that you will burn in a fiery death if you attempt to leave Siberia in this airport. Or at least you'll taxi around the runway for like an annoying amount of time. Okay, so we took advantage of the airport Wi-Fi that the stinky airport surprisingly has. That the population probability of planes taking off is 95%. 95% of planes generally take off successfully. But this is such a tiny airport, has no modern technology. We're not sure if we want to use the population mean as our prior, because we're really just not sure how much it applies to this specific airport. And at the same time, we don't want our prior to be planes definitely won't take off well, because maybe the fact that they don't have modern technology means that they know how to do things the old-fashioned way. Maybe it makes them better. Who knows? Not us. So we use a uniform prior of beta 1,1. And we decide on a beta distribution for our prior because the outcomes of our trials are going to be two mutually exclusive outcomes. The planes either take off or they don't take off. So we use a beta prior because then we have conjugate priors, hooray. Okay, so as I said, population probability of planes taking off is 95%. This airport is so tiny that there are only 10 planes that attempt to leave it every day. So 95% of 10 planes a day is 9.5 planes, and that doesn't work. So we decide that we're going to use a region of practical equivalence around our population mean, and we decide that anything between 90% and 100% of planes taking off successfully from this airport is practically equivalent to the population mean of 0.95. So we spend 10 days in this airport monitoring a total of 100 planes attempting to take off, and we see that 95 out of 100 planes successfully leave the Siberian airport. And at this point, we've been in Siberia for a week and a half, and we're really over it, so we decide we're not going to collect any more data, and we're just going to go ahead and run the analysis. So what we see is our uniform prior, and the sort of mauve colored line is the posterior. So we see that our uniform prior is pulling our posterior a little bit down from what the evidence suggests. But overall, it didn't change that much. So our sample mean is 0.94, which at first glance you would think is pretty close to the population mean of 0.95. But how can we be sure that it's close enough? So as I said, our region of taxable equivalence around the population mean is 90%, sorry, to 100%. And as it turns out, the highest density interval of our posterior distribution ranges from 0.9 to 0.98. So that is the region under which 95% of the area under the curve falls. So look at that, magic. Our HGI falls completely within our region of taxable equivalence that we definitely decided before we collected data. So therefore, the most credible estimates of the probability of a plane leaving the Siberian airport fall completely within a region that we had previously decided is functionally the same as the population mean. Credible estimates of probability for the Siberian airport are no different than the population mean of airports generally. Therefore, we very happily conclude that we're just as safe taking off from the Siberian airport as we would be taking off from any other airport. Generally, there's no credible difference. The null hypothesis is supported. We're so pleased. We got on a plane to the Bahamas and never looked back at Siberia again. I don't have a question slide. Questions?
Oh, come on. I can't be the one asking all the questions. Michael, have you got a question?
Did all planes take off?
Do they all take off?
Yeah, all stations.
In our sample, no, 5 of them, I don't want to get too dark, 5 of them just taxied around the runway. And it was really annoying. They had to like, get their bags out of the overhead compartment. It was unfortunate.
So Morgan, you know that in aviation, taking off is optional. Landing is required.
Right. Well, we weren't going to land at the Siberian airport.
That's true.
We were trying to leave.
Yeah, so you used the evidence that you had available to figure out whether this was a good plan.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
I think through Siberia has its own perils, I suppose.
Yeah, okay, at least you got to the airport. Okay, nobody's gonna ask a question. Morgan, you don't get to answer this. Okay, so I'll ask it to the group. Why would you select that the rope be within in that range of 0.9 to 1? And not some other value that you think would be reasonably different, so that it could be close to the 0.95, but not look as if it were within that range. So in other words, why not 0.88? Would you reject the 0.88 based upon that rope and say that that's clearly different? Because if you think about it, you only have 100 observations, so that the likelihood function that you're creating, the evidence, is actually going to be pretty weak from 100 observations. Now, granted, I didn't expect you guys to spend 100 days there to collect 1,000 observations, but that would give you a little bit more fidelity from your evidence. So why is it that you would think 0.9 to 1 is the region of proximal equivalence and not something like 0.88?
So in terms of what numbers you choose, our reading suggested that you have a lot of leeway in terms of what you can actually pick. And as Morgan had said, we were heavily tempted to choose multiples of 10, because in this case, we're looking at 10 planes. We can't have something like 8.8 planes make it off because, a wing
Right.
fell off.
Right.
Type of thing. So only some of it made it. In this case, we can use something like 0.9 to 1 because we really want to get out of here. And we really want to be sure that we're going to be getting out of here. And the lower we start moving, the more dangerous that ends up becoming. And so we could say that our defense for 0.9 to 1 is that we really want to be sure that we're actually taking off.
So Kevin, that's what I'm getting at, is that the defense for that interval has to be something that's a weighing of the risk and reward, right? And it's not just about getting out of Siberia. It's at what point do you want to risk If you want to have, there's a recent headline that's come out that if you take NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, that you increase the likelihood of heart disease. That just came out. It was just released. There was an article that was embargoed over the last 2 weeks that they claim to have definitive evidence for this. Don't worry, don't start pouring your NSAIDs out into the trash or into the toilet. They're perfectly fine. The evidence is very, very weak. And what they did is, one, they're not Bayesians, they're frequentists, most scientists are. But what they said is anything that's significant is worthwhile. And that region of proximal equivalence that you set is something that you set hopefully a priori, but you have to weigh the risks and rewards for making a judgment to get on the plane or to take NSAIDs. Right. And that's the beauty of using these types of models, is that you set this a priori. But you said something that I don't think you really want to defend. Not you per se, but your whole group. Just because you want to get out of there, you don't want to limit the data collection to only the range between 0.9 and 1, right? Because you did collect 100 planes, right? You observed for 10 days, which was nuts. Fire and spirit, well, I like the temperature of spirit, but I wouldn't want to stay there for too long. You'd want to have it at least in increments that are available to you in your sampling distribution, right? So your sampling distribution wasn't restricted to only tenths, because you could go down to 1 percentage points. So you could have had 0.88 because you had 100 observations. And even in the MCMC, as it's resampling, it's resampling from that probability density function, that beta density function, that's based upon 100 observations. So you can have integer changes. But your answer to the question of why not 0.88 is it was a cost benefit ratio that you did informally, and that's okay as long as it's stated a priori. Where it's not good is if you say, I'm going to take a look at the results and now I'm going to change my calipers to make it so that it fits what my posterior looks like, and then I'm going to make my judgment.
So because we had 100, I can see that working out. We have, say, 10.
Right.
And that's where you would say something like 0.88 is not necessarily going to work for us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Because 10 restricts the precision of your likelihood function.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the rope, it's not primarily used to overcome rounding issues. Is it just like an arbitrary, close enough kind of judgment?
Yeah, it's like for the purposes of our study, this is all the same. This is our.
So you would make that in your
Right.
intro or something, and then a reviewer would be like, that's way too big, that's way too small.
That's right. And they can readjust it according to what they view would be a reasonable range.
How do you define the loop? Could you also define it as from 0 to 0.9, because you really don't want to get into a plane that actually crashes. So if it's above 0.9, it's good. Or how do you define the rope?
Yeah, well, you define the rope a priori by whatever metric you have as your outcome, right? So it could be probabilities, it could be a point estimate, or a scale that you're developing. It could be a variety of things. But what you're doing is you're creating an interval around what you would consider to be equivalent. So how would you do this? In science, we typically do it by, let's take a look at all of the evidence from a meta-analysis. And I would say, of all of these findings, these would fall within the range of close enough, right? Close enough to be considered to be replicates of one another.
And there seems to be, from my understanding, when you're using the rope and the HDI, 2 levels of subjectivity. So one is, okay, what's my rope range? And then the other is how much of my rope is part of the HDI, or how much of the HDI is part of the rope. Well, 98% of the HDI is within the rope, or 95, or whatever it is. And then eventually you would hopefully say, I'm now uncomfortable that my HDI is falling more and more outside of my rope, at which point maybe your rope isn't good.
with a jet then your rope may be good, but your molds wrong. Maybe.
Right. Okay, other questions about that? No? Good? Excellent, thanks.
This is group one.
Wow, cool. You can do something different.
We're a family.
That's
One goes down, we're all gonna.
something, yeah, that's something we're definitely.
I attended a talk a while ago where 3 people got up and they said, each one said every third word. It was, no, it was totally confusing. Because, because they didn't have the same intonation and pitch and it was crazy. It was like listening to a cacophony for about 30 minutes.
It's like a random note.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. It's the ransom note of presentations. Group 1.
Yes, trying to work on the computer. For family, I think they're pretty far away from the group there.
I love them from this.
He's within the range of practical equivalence, so he's up there. Just how I roll.
Okay. So I'm gonna tell you guys a little story. Last night, I get a call from the Monte Carlo Casino in Las Vegas. Being such the big spender as I am, they wanted me to come out and try a new table game that they came up with. So this table game is literally called coin toss. It's a game that's supposed to give better odds for the player and give more player interaction. What the game is you go up, you bet heads or tails, the casino literally gives you a coin, and you toss the coin onto the table. And then depending on the outcome, you either get 1-to-1 odds on if you win or they take your money if you lose. So I go up. The game has been going on for a while. It took me a while to get there from the plane ride over and get a cab from the airport to the casino. And the game's been going on. I step up and they say, okay, your turn, Mr. Calvo. I say, thank you very much. And I start. And I decide, the odds. I decide, why don't I just bet on heads? That's what I decide. So I start flipping the coin. And I've been bankrolled, which is quite nice, $2,000. So I bet 1,000 on heads. First time I flip, heads, I win 1,000. Great, I pocket that. Next, I flip, tails, I lose my original 1,000, no problem. I take the 1,000 that I won, bet on heads again, I still got 1,000 in my pocket. My next 2 flips, tails. So now I'm down, I only got 1,000 left. And the next 2 series of flips, heads, tails, heads, tails. The last 3 flips, 10 total flips, I get 3 heads in a row. And I let my money ride, so I walk away with about $8,000. And I'm living large. And I'm saying, you know what, I'll take my money and I'm gonna run. I'm good. But as I'm leaving, about me, the pit boss stops me and brings me in the back room. And they accuse me of cheating. They say, you must be flipping differently with your attitude that you had. You're only betting on heads. You must have devised a way to flip the coin so that you get a better chance of getting heads than tails. And they basically say they're going to break my kneecaps and take my money and then throw me out of the casino. I beg and plead. I say, don't, please, please. I can prove that my method is no different than the average way of flipping a coin. I said, give me 30 minutes and a phone call. So I use my phone call and I call up my Project 1 group last night at like midnight or say, yeah. And I get them all together, we start a conference call, and we start working on this problem. We use Bayesian statistics to prove that my method is no better to try and save my kneecaps.
So Jose's null hypothesis here is that he was in fact not cheating, completely fair. Obviously, the probability of getting a heads is 0.5. On the other hand, the alternative hypothesis is that he was in fact cheating, which would lead to a higher probability of heads and kneecaps being destroyed. So our analyses that we ran, and we'll talk about these in greater detail, were the Bayes factor approach, as well as the rope or region of fractal equivalence. The Bayes factor, we chose this because I don't know about you guys, but we're pretty new to this, and the Bayes factor is pretty easy to interpret. A single number. Also, it's highly cited, so it is a pretty good approach. And then for the rope, it's again a straightforward interpretation. It's kind of an interval through which you can base if the null is supported or not.
All right, so what are we using to to go into this analysis? Well, first off, the casino has a prior. This is the experience of people who have gone before Jose, as well as their expectations of how the coin flip should work. They don't want to lose money off of this game. So the casino has a prior distribution of parameters based on the casino's prior beliefs. Now, added to this, we have the posterior, which is the probability of the new data added to the prior. We also have a likelihood, given Jose's coin flips. We're taking that data and those parameters and trying to figure out how likely or probabilistic the data is. We're pretty much just describing it on a chart. Finally, our goal is to generate the Bayes factor. That's what really tells us whether or not Jose's kneecaps are going away or not. So here's our general approach. We're taking this prior distribution, casino's beliefs based on what we know about the coin flipping game. We're updating this with Jose's coin flips, trying to figure out the probability of getting that many heads, and this produces our posterior distribution. From that posterior distribution, we're producing a Bayes factor that will compare the probabilities of our null and alternative hypotheses. We're comparing this distribution to a rope. And as Stephen said, the Bayes factor tells us which hypothesis is supported or not.
All right, so setting our prior. So we use a beta prior because we're doing coin flips, and we know that with a beta distribution, we're looking at hits or misses, which is equivalent to our heads or tails here, because in our betting game, heads is always a hit, tails is always a miss. So the casino developed this game for kind of their big opening to promote people coming in, because 50-50 odds on a gambling game is pretty good. So our casino prior, a beta 50-50 distribution.
There were 100 coin tosses before.
Yes, so 50 hits and 50 misses. So for our Bayes factor analysis results, we selected our rope to be between 0.4 and 0.6. And the rationale here was that the casino owners say they're not going to be too suspicious of unfair coin flipping if we get a posterior density somewhere where most of it falls between the 0.4 and 0.6. So we ran our Bayes factor through R, and we got a number of 0.34 evidence to suggest that the null hypothesis is true.
And if you look at the orange line, that's our likelihood distribution, and the posterior and prior distributions almost overlap. So when we look at the rope, we see that our posterior falls within the region of the rope, and we convince the casino owners to not break Jose's kneecaps
This time.
So early this morning, they give me, because of the confusion, they decided to keep the winnings, unfortunately. They boot me on a plane. I just landed early this morning. Rushed right here to class.
Good job. All right.
So I guess this is a general question about priors. If the casino suspected that you were qualitatively different than the previous customers, does it make sense to use the prior, or should it be uninformed?
Well, it's because we're saying that his method is different. So we're using their prior, because we assume that his method is the same as the method they're using.
So if they were a journal editor, couldn't they be like, yeah, but we think he's actually different, so why are you weighting your likelihoods with the
Because
prior?
if you look at the rope, you see that the posterior falls within the region of 0.4 and 0.6. So there isn't a difference between these distributions.
A casino would take a different one,
Different prior?
a different prior.
Or they can just
Well, they
break
could say, they can choose an uninformed prior, is what I'm saying.
They don't have Bayesian stats though.
But also, yeah, different prior would be completely driven by the data, so.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to break the details.
Right, because you used 50/50 for your priors, for your beta. And that's a lot of information. You know that, so everyone familiar with this, so that the amount of evidence that you get from beta distribution is A plus B. So that tells you the not just the strength of the evidence in terms of probability, but the strength of the numbers in terms of the law of large numbers. So as A plus B gets bigger, that becomes a bigger subjective prior probability, right? And it's okay that you use that, that's good. However, you have to think on the flip side of it. See, if I were the casino owner, I would say, you guys, Jose, I'm very sorry about this, but you might want to take up a very inactive activity, like bridge. Because when you have a prior of a beta prior of 50/50, you need at least 100 observations in order to budge that prior. Because if you think about it in terms of the combination of the prior plus the likelihood, well, the likelihood is what you're contributing. So you only contributed 10 to an existing 100. So you're going to budget just a teeny tiny bit. So you've actually persuaded them with insufficient evidence about something that they felt strongly about before. And what you could do is you could say, suppose that you took the first 10 coin tosses that the previous people did, and you came in and you didn't accuse them of doing any wrong, but you're accusing me of doing it. Where it's at least even, right? Or the reason why you would choose a beta of uncertainty that would be centered at 0.5, but you'd still be uncertain, of a beta of 1,1. That's the uniform, right? It's easy to update uniform priors. It's really hard to update priors with a lot of evidence. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay?
I guess we're thinking, the main reason the casino was thinking I cheated was because I kept my bet on heads, so it turned into heads is a hit, tails is a miss.
Yeah.
But all the previous bettors switched their bet every time they bet.
Yep.
So you made it a lot, trying to compare my 10 to the previous, like the first 10 for hits and misses as far as winning versus losing money or winning money from the casino would be harder. I don't know if you have to do that because they switch their bet every time.
Yeah, no.
You could also make your argument that the coin you use is biased, one way or the other.
Right.
Because it's been used 100 times.
Yeah.
So that would be the better. But when it's you that's changed, they're probably not going to regard because you're actually not comparing your prior to your register, you're updating your priors with your data.
But this was a great example, by the way, of the hot hand. If you're interested in sports, take a look at the hot hand, because a lot of people have been arguing about a player who has a hot hand should be, I don't know, fed the ball. Water polo, I'm sure it's the same thing, right? That whoever's hot, you should be feeding the ball to because they're most likely to be the productive one. But it turns out if you look at it from a Bayesian standpoint, and the way you could do that is parcel every individual who played before you as 10 coin tosses. So the 10 coin tosses for Sally and for Jane, and then for Bill, and then for Sam, and then for Jose. And what you can do is you can look at that as a trial, just like you had 4 trials before, right? So it's not 50 people before you or 50 coin tosses. It's 5 trials of 10 and then your trial of 10, right?
Okay.
And then you can model it similar to the way the Berry book would do it, where you're modeling it based upon trials. That's why they were able to take binomials or a beta function and turn it into a normal function. Okay, you have to follow the logic.
I have two questions. The first one is scientific. Was it your intent to emulate Donald Trump's hand gestures?
Oh,
Did I? No.
Shots
I think the gangster mentality that you were pulling off
That's probably-
was starting to come out a little bit.
That was the scientific question?
That was the ascientific.
I didn't know that there was not a space.
Ah.
All right, next.
So when you were talking about hot hand stuff, isn't hot hands basically artificial binning into games and quarters and things like that? Where if I just took away all of the binning of a game and I just laid it all out, then really it's just the same average that you always have.
Yes, yeah, so it's an example of Simpson's paradox. Is that sometimes the aggregates give you the illusion of less uncertainty.
Okay.
You know, like choosing the person with the hot hand.
Right.
Then they're really often. It's like the paradox is actually pretty broadly construed.
It's like hot shooter and craps.
Yes, same.
Yeah.
It's the same. All right, good job, guys. And by the way, these are not criticisms, these are opportunities for you guys to hear this
Yeah.
and, oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then go back and maybe if you're interested, change it into different trials and see whether the evidence would change. And maybe it would.
Yeah, because the method of distribution is gonna be a lot narrower.
Exactly. Good job.
Other one, okay.
You guys want to see how they're for our-
Two items, so,
There is much variability in the literature of how people report bases we're having.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, you could have 5 different studies that are really focused on similar things, and not one of them does the same approach. And that, the reason why I'm doing this is to show you that this is the departure from the frequentist models. Frequentists are at a distinct advantage because there is a rote way of doing things.
So it's really easy to detect when somebody went astray.
No, not necessarily, because there's a lot that we don't say in frequentist models that matter in terms of the results, right? Because we evaluate the results of the frequentist model about whether people eclipse this magical P of less than 0.5 value. All of a sudden, we interpret the results as, oh, that's good, right? But with these models, there are a lot of decisions that go into it. Decisions that need to be explicitly stated. They need to be because people wouldn't have an obvious idea about what you're doing, right? Not that they don't know enough about Bayesian, but even a Bayesian wouldn't know what you were doing without those details, right? More degrees of freedom. Part of the reason why I would argue that there's less likelihood for Bayesian statistics to ever take over from frequentist models, at least in social and behavioral sciences. Okay, you guys are we at last? Time flies when we're having fun, right? Sarcasm has no place. He wasn't. Yeah. Yeah. I was born ready.
All right, so we're group 2. Okay, so here's the problem. Itching is a real issue in our society. There's a current drug out on the market that is able to cure itching, stop itching for 43 out of every 100 people who have this issue. And there's a new drug on the market by No Itching Incorporated, they call it Drug N, that claims that they can cure itching in a significantly larger portion of the population. So the federal regulators require that in order for a drug to be dispersed for people to buy, they have to prove that they cure itching or cure the symptom of at least one more person out of every 100. So being that the standard is currently 43 people out of every 100, we're going to test to see if this new drug N, can cure at least 44 people out of every 100. So to sum that up, we have 0.43 is the probability of the effectiveness of drug B, the current standard, and we want to see at least 0.44 likelihood of the new drug in.
So our data, we used a sample of 1,000 subjects that was randomly generated in R binomially. The drug was either indicated effective or ineffective. And we used the following parameters. So we used Jeffrey's prior because we hypothesized that drug N is either effective or ineffective. And because our sample is binomially distributed, we used a conjugate beta prior with those parameters.
So first, what we started to do is figure out the underlying map and see basically what tests we should run in R to demonstrate our data effectively. So first thing we really looked at is like the Bayes factor and how it related to the likelihood ratio. So we ran these tests, but the main downside is that it didn't really take into account the significance testing. So we went on with our analyses and tried other things. So then we got to this posterior odds approach, which eventually brings you to the Bayes theorem where you can kind of cancel out products, and then you end up with the posterior probability is proportional to the likelihood times the prior probability. Anyway, you guys all did the same things probably because we had these binomial distribution. We were able to say that conceptually our prior and our posterior were both binomial, so we were able to do the beta thing, which is kind of works out very well with math magic and lets us do easier tests in the future. So the next thing we went on to was the Markov chain Monte Carlo, which I'm sure a lot of you did as well, which is just basically an algorithm that does a random sampling approach throughout time, but we were told to not do that. So we did run this, and then the next thing we ran, which is, again, like all of you, eventually this region of practical equivalence, which is basically saying that some important region you can treat as sort of equal values and compare it to the 95% of the highest density interval, which gives you essentially a p-value like thing for Bayes.
All right, so now we can take a look at some graphs. Unfortunately, their scans are pretty small, so I'll just explain what's going on. That's pretty much only our sample. So the 1,000 people we tested on the new drug. And what we can see here is just the likelihoods, and here you have the probability parameter of our distribution. So here you have 0, here you have 1, and we meet somewhere in the middle. And the middle is at the moment, I guess, 0.41. So 41% of the people out of the 1,000, their itching was reduced. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. The next thing you can do here is you can look at the likelihood ratio, which is you look at the model that says 44% of the people gain relief to the one that says 43% of the people gain relief, which is pretty much over both hypotheses, right? And in the end, what we get is 0.4, or if we reverse it, it is 2.5 times or 2.4 times more likely that the new drug is not better than the old drug. So then, with respect to the posterior odds, you can just see the Jeffrey's prior here, which is this U-shaped thing. because it says either the drug is pretty bad or pretty good. There were some rumors, so we were like, hey, either this drug is pretty good or pretty bad because some people hated it, some whatever. So then we updated the prior with our data, and in the end, we got our posterior here, which is the red thing. It also peaks, but this time it peaks at 0.41. So an educated guess would say, if it peaks at 0.41, probably it's not better than 0.43. But anyways, we looked at posterior odds, which is similar to the likelihood we already had in slide 4. And anyways, okay. So we also took a brief look at the Markov chain Monte Carlo sample, which pretty much uses our data to infer a variance of the parameter in the sample. So in the end, what we got is that our sample most likely stems from a distribution between p equals 0.381 to 0.443. Includes our alternative hypothesis of 0.44, which tells us, well, if we increased our sample, we could probably exclude the alternative hypothesis based on this Monte Carlo sampling. At the moment, we really can't, but I mean, it's close enough to the edge. So if we chose a 90% HDI, probably we could. But that wasn't our main purpose anyway. Lastly, we did the rope thing, which most of you also did. The graph is a little bit messy, but as you can see, the prior, the red one is the posterior, the red one is included. The prior is included. The Jeffries prior I talked about. And then I have some messy lines that are a little bit too small, but anyway, you have the gray line that is the density maximum of our sample. And then I just plotted in the two hypotheses we have. So here's one, the yellow one is 0.43, that's our old drug. And the purple one is the new drug. So we aim for a 0.44 probability of the new drug to stop itching. But yeah, but what you can see is that the data is like significantly to the left of the purple curve, which is bad. Also, we did this rope thing, which we kind of defined between 42% and 44%. This rope interval is always a little bit arbitrary. We chose 0.42 and 0.44 as borders for the rope interval because we say, that's close enough to our old drug to be better. So we want our HDI to be on the right side of this rope interval, which it is not, as you can see here. Also, you can see like this is like a zoom in of this region. So you can see the HDI is centered around the density maximum, obviously. And it barely includes our hypothesis on the right side, which is bad because we want our new drug to be actually better. And what it says here is our new drug is worse because all the HDI is on the left side of the new hypothesis. I hope this kind of makes sense.
All right, so should drug M stay on the market? So according to our analyses, no. So, basically, drug N is just as likely to cure itching as drug B. In fact, when we look at it descriptively, drug N is worse. And when we take into consideration our rope analyses, we see that it overlaps with our HDI, so we accept the null hypothesis. In terms of our MCMC analyses, it showed that it cannot be excluded. The used sample actually has the required efficacy of 40%. So what we suggest is that although it market that maybe they redo testing to increase the sample size in order to exclude investigations.
I have a question for you guys. So does it make sense to use the other company's data as your prior?
You mean for the rope interval or for the prior? I mean, the real prior was just hearing rumors about the efficiency of the drug.
Yeah.
So
But
this
since
was
we're testing out the null hypothesis, the prior for the other company and see whether it's different from that. Because if it's not different, then you can update it. Shouldn't be a problem. No, I don't know. I don't know.
No, if it's not different, then you can update it. Right, it's like what they were doing is they were doing a point estimate, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How is that different than a null?
I mean, our null was the 0.43, right?
The point, yeah, was it 0.43 or 0.44?
Yeah, so the existing like standard is 0.43, and this new drug claims to be
Better.
at least 0.44, right?
Okay.
Or better.
Okay. So I was thinking that you were saying that in order for you to be happy with this drug, that if you were comparing the data to the 0.44 estimate and not the 0.43 estimate, which one is it? Which one is the accurate comparison? 0.43 or 0.44?
So we wanted to see if the data fit our model 0.44 better than the model 0.43.
Right. Right. And it did. Right?
Did not.
Right. But where's the null embedded in that?
I mean, 0.43 is our null, kind of.
Right, it's a comparison. Okay. So what you have to do is you have to state it as a comparison. Right? Because think about this, like a frequentist would not follow what you guys are talking about. Because the frequentist will say, I don't understand this because it has to be right? That's the null.
Right.
So now there is no difference.
Yeah, but what you're saying is that it's approximately equal or greater than 0.44. That is the mu of the end drug, right?
I mean, I would say our null is that the data approximately is it's less effective than 0.44 now, but that's the other way around. No?
Yeah, but it wasn't that it's, in order for you to accept the new drug, it'd have to be 0.44 or better, right?
Yes.
Because that's what you're saying ahead of time. A priori, you're saying, I'm only willing to accept this if it outperforms it by 1 person out of the 100. Okay? So what I'm helping you with is trying to figure out how to resort this, because what you guys did was more sophisticated. And in a way, I buy it. It was more sophisticated than just doing 1 sample test. You guys had lots of different nuances to this that were buried within the comparison. So what you had is you had this comparison, but what you could say is you could have said that the mean of the new drug is going to be equal to 0.44. So in order to make this a 0 point that's easy to interpret, because we don't think of 0.44 as easy to interpret. We think of 0 as easy to interpret because it's just a point.
Then you could say we look at the difference, and if the difference is 0, it's our null hypothesis. If the difference is bigger than 1, it's our own.
Yeah. So what you guys did is you guys jumped a little bit ahead of trying to look at explanations for a more sophisticated hypothesis. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that's kind of cool. It's great. But in so doing, it makes it harder to follow. So what you could have had is you could have just said that this is 1 minus 44. Right? And centered it, essentially centered the results so that they're around 0. So that then, if you go to your figure earlier on, but yeah, the complicated one that you had that little zoom in on, which I thought that's really cool, by the way. So you can actually center all of this to be at 0, right? 1 minus 0.44. So that then when you're communicating your results, the people who cannot remember that 44 out of 100, which by the way, is probably everybody's memory. So you got to make it simple, simple, simple. Okay? So try to simplify the problem, shift this axis so that you're centering the hypothesis at 0. And this is the critical problem here. How do you accept the null? So in frequentist models, we've been bludgeoned with this idea, thou shalt never accept the null. Never. Why? Because it's illogical. So what I'm asking you to do is to accept the null in a way that gives you exactly what you were talking about here. Exactly. You got this nice rope, and the rope tells you that it's not only inclusive, it is inclusive of 0.44. Right?
Yes.
But it's also inclusive of drug B, which makes them equivalent. So I would actually keep it on the market, only if it's cheaper.
Or fewer side effects.
Yeah, or fewer side effects or something like that. So, the duty that most drug makers have is that if you make a drug, it has to have equal or better benefits to the reigning champion. And if drug B, I forgot what it was, that best and something.
Yeah.
Better
life.
Better life. The better life drug and the new drug, if they were shown to be equivalent, which they are here, because of this the region of proximal equivalence suggests that they are essentially producing equivalent effects. Because of that, don't throw it out. You've got this great marketing arm. Now you can tell people that it comes in a bright green pill, and you won't mistake it for your laxative.
But then again, we have a power problem, no? I mean, if we just use 10 people in the sample, everything would be the same.
No, yes and no. And that is the problem with null hypothesis testing, is that all I have to do is use lousy measures in small samples to show that I can fail to reject the null. But by specifying what your confidence intervals are around here, the smaller your sample size, the wider this distribution gets, the less certainty you have. So at some point, if you use a really small sample, the region of proximal equivalence may include also drugs that have no longer been on the market because they are ineffective. Right?
All right, I see.
Right. So it becomes a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, you can relax it to show that you're part of the group, but really what you want to do is boost the evidence. So just as you said, if you boosted the evidence to get a few thousand more subjects, you might actually reduce the rope and show superiority to the drug. Although boost this up. But the point here is try to keep it simple. Okay, for the next project, keep your mind on and keep your focus on something like here was univariate, and you guys had a lot of moving parts, and moving parts sometimes are good, but it's hard to tell the story. Keep it as simple as possible to the 0 effect, right? So for the next project, what we're going to do is we're going to have bivariate, and you can use any type of bivariate. Now this is where we start increasing the degrees of freedom. But as we increase the degrees of freedom, this was great, and I mean way higher level than I expected. So don't think of it as you did anything wrong. It's like I asked for 5 and you gave me 8. Okay, which is great. But now for the next one, try to keep it at that level of where you are here. Because now you've got the makings of perfect 2 sample test where you can compare the results from two sampling distributions, right? In essence, which is the bivariate model for project two. Okay, does anybody have any questions for these guys?
Yeah, I might just not be understanding generally, but if your null hypothesis revolves around the 0.44, why would that value be at the end of the rope? Would it be in the middle? Or that was my understanding of the rope. You want that?
So our null is 4.3, sorry for the confusion.
Oh, okay.
But so what we did is 0.43 is the support, right? Which is like this yellow line, and then we looked at our sample, and we want to see if the sample is actually better as our null. But the sample is distributed to the left, so that's the mean of the sample, which is worse than the drug that's on the market, which is bad. And it's really far away from our alternative hypothesis that it's better. Does it make things kind of clear?
Were you asking about the purple? Because the purple line is like the requirement by the FDA, like it has to be at least here. I know it's hard to see the colors.
The purple is the rope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Purple is like
This
the black
purple
line,
line?
looks black.
Yeah, the purple lines, you can see it.
Oh,
I have a hard time seeing
Okay.
it from here, but that purple line
ah,
is that point at which the FDA requires. So that's a point estimate.
Okay.
Right. But your question is a good one, because how is it that this rope extends to the left of the point estimate? The point estimate isn't about data.
No, it's two models we compare.
Yeah, it's a fixed point that is mandated by the FDA. The data come from this red one. And the measure of central tendency is this gray line, and it goes right through the center of this rope.
okay.
So it has to do more with, well, this red should be the posterior density. Is it the posterior density?
Yes.
So if the FDA says that one point change is meaningful, but you guys are saying that everything within a 2-point band is the same, doesn't that contradict?
Okay, so that now like the new drug company has evidence, they can to the FDA and say, you're full of bullshit. Like, I actually like can prove that it's equivalent to this current standard. So I don't know, it's complicated, but I mean, FDA like would not pass it, like with the given rule.
I mean, you could say, they say they require it to be 1 point better, but what this says is, okay, they need to be, so they're required to make it 1 point better, so our rope is 1 point better or 1 point worse.
Yeah, and Sam's question is a good one, because you'll run into this a lot, where a measure may actually have a level of precision that's, say, 3 points. But there may be a mandate, voting polls, right? Voting polls are a good one, where people will say, I'm unwilling to consider any difference that is a priori, that is within plus or minus 2 percentage points. Okay, that's like the FDA. But then when the data come out, the data are sufficiently noisy that you probably have a level of precision that's plus or minus 5 percentage points. So they're two separate things. One is a mandate for a high level of precision, the FDA, and the other is what the data can deliver. And that's the data will never ever deliver high standards, not in social and behavioral sciences. It's not to tell you that the world is horrible and all of that, and we're doomed. It's just that there's an expectation of data from social and behavioral sciences that is rare to deliver upon. And we don't have to relax our standards necessarily, but we have to be more realistic about what we do. Guys, this was really good. This was, again, strapped a JADO pack on top of a caravan. It went really fast. Blew the wheels off. You guys know that Darwin board, don't you?
Yes.
Everybody.
What is it?
Darwin board? Oh, yeah, they took out I think some sort of.
No,
Come on, you guys know me, I get paper. Don't ever give me paper. Just walk into my office and you'll see papers. It has like this mind of its own where it collects and it collects on piles and then it stays there forever. All right, so I hope everybody saw the variability in approaches to the same problem, right? So we all had the same problem. To accept the null. And you can do it from a technical, complicated way to the simplest way. All of these approaches are relatively equal or equivalent in Bayesian models. This is one of the reason why I wanted to do these projects is I wanted to show you that there's not a single way to skin a cat, sorry. Well, have you ever heard there's multiple ways to skin a dog? No, you haven't. I rest my case. I pick on cats.
He does.
A lot. The Australians have the right idea about cats. Little feral cats. Yeah, I must have had a bad experience as a kid. But anyway.
So bad you redacted.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways in which you can do this one simple problem. One simple problem. And having an objective for the next project is good so that as you're learning about Bayesian statistics, start to incorporate what you're learning for your next objective. And the next objective is to take two distributions. But what do you want to do with those two distributions? You can look at them in terms of a correlation, right? Think about bivariate models. So there's correlations, there's t-tests, two sample t-tests. Now they can be independent or dependent, and you'll learn a little bit about hyperpriors if you deal with dependencies. If you're not interested in continua, like you have two probability density functions that are like betas, or if they're counts, frequency counts, they could be two distributions like Poisson distributions. And you can have a relationship that you are computing between these that could be like a phi coefficient. Okay? You can, the beauty of Bayesian statistics is you're not limited to the frequentist. You can say that you're interested in a 2x2 matrix of hits and misses, you know, like in a signal detection theory problem, where you have hits and misses, and what you want is you want a combination of the time it takes to make a hit and the time it takes to make a miss, and some sort of trade-off, right? Risk reward for those types of things. So there's all sorts of ways that you can do this. I'm going to assemble the groups in probably this evening, you know, about how you guys work together and how things came out. I will assemble the groups again, reassemble them, and you should get together and start thinking about the problem right away, okay? And then what could you do to help your team solve that by reading? Okay, so this is really a focus on project-based inquiry. And as I told you before, I'm your tour guide. I'm going to give you some additional material that you really need to know that I think is poorly described. And that is, as I told you before, I'm so happy that you guys did Barry. I'm really psyched about that, because Barry is the transition from going from discrete events and point predictions to the probability density function, like the infinite number of outcomes. And it was a good transition where one group at least did it by discrete events, like what he calls, I think, what does he call them? Studies? Models, yeah. Everybody's got a different way of transitioning from point estimates to models. But if you imagine Barry went from discrete models to an infinite number of models with an infinite number of trials, what you get is you get that continuous distribution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition from point estimates to distributions. And then over the next few weeks, I'm going to start introducing a few other higher level things like hyper priors. Like, okay, you know what priors are now. Everybody's had a pretty good idea. And I'm psyched that somebody used Jeffrey's priors. That was cool. Very good. But you can see that there's informed, uninformed, naive, and all different types of priors. But I'm going to introduce you to this idea of hyper priors. And that is, you can model all sorts of things. Once you understand hyper priors, we're essentially moving in a domain that you probably are not too familiar with, but you're familiar with in literature, like moving from fixed effects models, okay, to random coefficient models. And from moving from, right, anybody, do you guys know about those? Linear mixed effects models, right? But then there's another thing. How about nested models, right? So if you're interested in education or teams, studying teams or couples, that's all nested model. Those are nested models. Why? Because the data that come from those smaller groups, there could be something about the group composition that gives rise to the dependent variable that isn't really part of the other predictors that you're interested in. So you have to account for nesting. Right? So we're going to talk about that, but it's going to come in the form of hyper priors. It's going to come in the form of expanding the models so that they allow you greater flexibility. So this is going to be more of a primer on the hyper priors, so that if you choose to have any dependency between your groups, that you can model that dependency. Okay, so it's like dependent t-tests. Just require a hyperparameter. That's it. You go, oh shit, that's easy, and then you expand it to more complicated models. All right, all right. That was an awesome job today. Awesome job. Later on today, I will post the form so that you can rate each other. You guys are really hard on one another. I just wait until you see the ratings. I'm going to post. These are my ratings, and these are your ratings, and mostly I give my ratings, okay, for the group performance. But I like to know how everything goes within the group, how you guys rate one another, because that's important for me to find out if there's anybody that's like kind of dragging along. I pull them aside and I say, hey, is there something I can do to help? I don't want, it's not punitive, it's really me trying to help everybody, okay? But I like to find out how things are going within groups and assigned groups, so that the sooner we get that data, the better for me and for Jake to assemble new groups. All right, we're done. Woohoo! Project 1 done. Yeah, later thing. So you get a form for the in group